Welcome to Voices of Innovation. I'm Cecilia, founder of the Catalytic site, where I guide scientists as they move from academia into biotech. Join me as I speak with entrepreneurs, researchers, and talent leaders driving innovation and building the companies of tomorrow. If you are considering a career in biotech or simply want to understand the sector from the inside, this is your new favorite place. Welcome to another episode of Voices of Innovation. Emma, you are an HR professional, you work across big corporates, scaling companies, venture capital, and now you're working directly with founders with P2 Knowledge, your own business. We met when you were the talent director at Start Codon, which was a VC set up to support early stage life science and healthcare startups in a more hands-on way, I would say. So not just through fundings, but also by helping founders think properly about talent, leadership, culture from the very beginning. And since then, you moved even closer to these early stage ventures, so that you work as a fractional chief people officer, so helping founders with the people side of their companies. For this conversation, I wanted to focus on what really happens in the very early days of a startup, especially from the point of view of people thinking about joining one. And of course, joining an early stage venture is very different from joining, for example, a Series B company, but also different again from joining a large corporate. So the hope for this conversation is to hopefully useful for scientists and non-scientists who are thinking about joining a startup and want a clear picture of what that actually involves. Before we start, do you want to give us maybe an overview of your career so far and tell us more about the work that you're doing at P2 Knowledge?
I'm excited to have this conversation. So yeah, I started my career at Arm, which is obviously big tech now in Cambridge, but I joined Arm when it was relatively small. And that was my first understanding of how growth companies work. And whilst I wasn't there in the very, very early stages, it gave me a real understanding of that journey, and also with acquisition of small companies and what they were doing as well. I then went from Arm, I was there quite a long time, to AstraZeneca, which again was completely opposite end of the scale. Before I then joined Start Codon as a venture builder, which was just really insightful for me. The incredible piece about Start Codon was we were right at the beginning. Often there were spin outs. And so I got to sort of see that journey of the founders through, and I still work with some of those Start Codon companies now, and they're much further on their journey. And it really crystallized the lesson for me around the building team and building organizations. But it also, having worked at AstraZeneca, which I loved the public purpose. It really crystallized for me the fact that I want to be in small companies. I really want to help small companies to build and to continue in, certainly with life science companies, that public purpose. What really drives me now is I love working with founders who have that real spark of excitement and that real purpose of what they're doing, and often have no idea how to build a company. They've never done it. They're often academics who've never done it. It's never boring. I can make a genuine difference in those early days to make sure they're doing the right things, and helping them build the teams. And it could be actually about supporting them to deliver on that vision, make the right decisions. And I find a lot of my role is helping people make that leap from academia into these companies with that real intention and realistic expectations. And I'm sure we'll cover that. Because I see a lot of power of people saying, actually, I want to be in those early stages. I want to learn as I go. I want to have that remit. But working with small companies is fabulous. I mean, it's hard work. And I'm not going to lie, they drive me crazy most of the time. But yeah, it's really exciting to work with them.
Fantastic. And as you were saying, you're seeing lots of academics going through the transition, moving from academia into industry, sometimes as founders, sometimes as, professionals joining existing teams. From your experience, what are the biggest challenges the academics face when moving into early stage biotech or life science companies, and how can they overcome them?
It's a really good question. So I think the biggest one is often not being ready for the pace and the tolerance for ambiguity that's required in early stage companies. In academia, you spend months perfecting an experiment, getting it peer reviewed, making every detail really watertight. in a startup, you don't have that luxury. You need to make decisions with incomplete information and move forward often. And so I see people getting stuck in that academic debate mode where about what's needed rather than that needed pragmatic action, I guess. Perfection at the expense of actually doing something is often what you see as people come back out of academia, because they've had, to a large extent, the luxury of being able to have that debate. And the big thing here for me is a lot of people make the jump before they've actually done the work to understand what startup life is really like. They haven't done their due diligence. They haven't gone and got any experience of our world. Even just observing or doing short projects, they often haven't done that. They're making a major career decision based on an idea of what it might be like rather than the reality. And so for me, it's about making sure people get that reality view. It doesn't have to be huge amounts of experience. It just has to be a conversation a large amount of the time. The other challenge, and it probably sounds a bit harsh, but it's kind of going to be, it's important. I'm going to kind of give you two flavors of what I'm about to say. Sometimes it's genuinely thinking that you're the smartest person in the room, and there's an arrogance to that. And so people will come in and, you'll have somebody come in where they've been a lead researcher. They've assumed that translates into knowing how to build a business. Often that doesn't work. I don't come across that often, but every now and again, if you're arrogant, you'll see it. But like I say, it's not the often one. More often than not, one of the big challenges is the thought of masking imposter syndrome. So often people come in, they're so worried about not being the expert anymore or not being in academia that they overcompensate and won't admit what they don't know. And so we see a lot of academics come in and not think about actually what their knowledge and how they can use it. Honestly, from my perspective, you need to get to be honest with yourself, honest about why you're making the move. If you're leaving academia because you're frustrated with the system but you still want to work exactly the same way, then don't come to a startup. It's not going to be the place to go. But if you're genuinely curious, if you're willing to learn, if you can be, humble about what you already know, and clear about and brave enough to contribute, then, most people will thrive. So I think from my perspective, it's just getting people to know what they're jumping into, know a bit more about themselves, and then utilize all those great skills. But make the decision for the right reasons. Don't make the decision because you've decided that you don't want to be in academia anymore because you're frustrated. Make the decision because you want to be at the early stages of a company where there's going to, potentially be something amazing, and that you're prepared to put that hard work in to understand and learn as the business learns as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great advice. And as you mentioned, as you said, like masking the imposter syndrome will prevent you to really learn from those early stages where as a newcomer to the startup space, you will learn so much about the market, the dynamics, of course, how to structure a company, but also about the people that you will need to hire and welcome to your team.
I also think that is understanding that I'm well into my career. I've worked 25 odd years in HR. I don't know lots of things. I suffer from imposter syndrome on a regular basis. But actually, sometimes having the power of an early stage company saying, I don't know what I don't know, or I don't know that specific thing, just means that people will go, well, let's learn together. And so it's not saying that you won't have imposter syndrome, we all do. It's just saying, if you're aware of it and go, I don't know, the power in that in a startup is amazing, because the small team that you'll be will all learn together. So I'm just asking people to be brave earlier, rather than waiting like me to be in my late 40s and knowing I can say, I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about early stage team building. So let's say that we have a scientist founder. He's got a great scientific idea. He needs to build a company around that. When building a team from scratch, what qualities that founder should prioritize in the first hires?
Yeah, I mean, the technical skill, obviously, let's be clear, we need technical skill. That's the first. But let's assume we all know that that's not something we need. First hire needs actually to be able to do the job. So you don't look for technical perfection, is my first piece of advice. But what makes or breaks those early hires is the attitude they bring, their relationship with the founder, whether there's a genuine shared purpose and values. So if I'm out there looking for early stage team members, I look for people who genuinely want to learn. And so founders should look for those people, not people who say they're open to learning, but really want to do the things that they've always, but actually really want to do things they always wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people who are curious, who ask questions, who are comfortable saying, I don't know this yet, and I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And for me, the relationship, very early stage, the relationship with the founder is enormous in terms of its contribution as people start to join the team. You're going to be in each other's pockets. You're making it up as you go along a lot of the time. If there isn't that trust and good communication from the start, you're not going to be aligned on that purpose. You're not aligned with those values. It falls apart quickly. So, there's something really important that founders often miss, in my experience, is that you need people who are brave enough to challenge you and your idea. So, this is your baby basically, and nobody wants to be told their baby's ugly, right? Let's be clear. But actually, in the early hires, you need to complement the technical skills that they bring with your technical skills, but also willing to push back constructively. So if you're surrounding yourself with people who just nod and agree with you and say it's a great idea to everything, you're not building a team, you're building an echo chamber, and that's what kills early stage companies. So some of the best companies I work with, the first one or two hires have actually been quite challenging for the founder because they do push back. You also need people who understand what they're signing up for. So founders, being really clear with people about the ambiguity, the pace, the fact that their role will probably evolve as the company figures out what it actually needs. When you can't cover every technical skill, and you can rarely find somebody who's perfect in the early days. You need people who are adaptable enough to stretch beyond their core expertise when you need them to be, but to be self-aware enough to know when to bring in help or admit they're out of their depth. So it's about then the founder helping those individuals to think about themselves, but founders need to think about, it's not just skills they need on paper, it's whether they're creating an environment where people can actually challenge them, and whether they're hiring a team they need versus the team that makes them comfortable. So for me, early stage founders, yes, you need technical skills. You might need that scientist, that biologist, that that chemist. Don't look for perfection. So don't look for somebody that is the best in the field. You'll never find them. They'll never jump out of academia to come and join a startup at that point. Look for somebody that when you talk to them technically works out and, has got the skill set. But look at the early stage hires as people who are rare, those rare gems that you need to polish, that you need to help, that you need to grow, and that will grow with you. Because if you just look for a technical person, you're just not going to get very far.
Absolutely. And something that you already touched on is that, from my perspective as a former recruiter for this space, I've seen founders often look for and hire people like them, replicates, and regret them. As the company grows, they realize, as you said, that they are creating an echo chamber. So there is the need to have different ideas, different perspective, different people coming from different paths of lives to really make it successful in the long term.
Yeah, and also one thing I didn't mention, but I'll mention now, is it's also the fact that you don't just narrow your view of people to one university or one set of universities as well. Because what you find, so it's great that you might spin out of one of the Oxbridge colleges, and you want people, and you have a view of academics in there. If you're looking at academics or people with academic background, there are great people from all over the university system. And often what I find is those students that perhaps haven't gone to the higher tier universities have great, they might have great PhDs elsewhere, are often a lot more resilient and a lot more able to deal with ambiguity. And so if you're going to really challenge yourself, look at interviewing people who have the technical background but come from a different place to you, because actually, again, not only is it technically can you argue and have great kind of collegiate discord, but actually they'll challenge you also on setting the team, building the team from the early stages. And if you want to attract more people into your team, them seeing people like them in your team already is a great way to do that. So don't go for somebody that looks and feels like you, go for somebody that technically can help you drive it, but also helps you with that nod, like you say, to that team coming. And that just gives you that diversity of thought and diversity of understanding, which is brilliant. And that's why, I'm doing a piece of work, hopefully to support some of an activity going on at ARU, where there's some great students there that could come out and work in early stage companies to just need a bit of experience. But those students don't see it because they're sat in Cambridge with Cambridge University. Just got to think beyond yourself.
Yes, excellent. Let's talk about culture and culture fit. I think the term culture is such an abused word because you'll find it in every job description. Everyone will, be looking for people matching their amazing culture, their companies. It's also very difficult to define, and therefore it's difficult for a candidate to show that they could be a great fit for that company culture-wise. So I can see how critical as a pillar is for a new venture. And of course, you need to get it right from the very beginning, ideally. But how do you intentionally shape it in a team of 5 to 10 people so it can scale well as the company grows? And how can candidates showcase that they, could be an actual good fit in terms of culture?
Yeah, the best examples I've seen was teams at the very start, and at Start Codon we talked about this in some of the venture build program stuff we did, is when they were tiny, they sat down and explored the company they wanted to build, not just the business, but their own values and the culture they wanted to create. And crucially, with each new team member they've done that again. They've had that conversation again and explored it together. It wasn't to ensure that people, come and fit in, if you like, but it was genuinely a building process. These are our values currently. These are the things we're doing. Actually, how do you contribute to that? How does that differ? So they've created something you could reference, right? Ways of working that you'd actually agreed on together, and they made it part of their everyday, not a poster on the wall, but something that showed up in how they made decisions, how they communicate, all of those good things, how they celebrate, what they call out when things aren't working. What makes it scale really well was that it's adaptable, and I think that's the thing where people get really hung up. I think culture is adaptable, and you learn every time somebody new joins. So it's not wholesale change. These things are typically DNA in organizations by that point, but they are deliberately challenged and revisited. And people ask on a regular basis, and a new joiner is a great opportunity to do it, but they do it all the time, does this still work? Does this new person bring a perspective that makes us better, a culture, to our culture? Are we living these values, or are we just talking about them? So that espoused values system versus lived. If we look at big brands that we see in the press, and I won't mention the brands, but if we see a big brand saying we are this, we are a certain way, and then we hear stories about how employees are treated, that espoused, aren't we wonderful, but the lived reality, and that's really important. They don't allow companies that create great culture at early stages don't allow artificial harmony. If something's not working, they surface it, they deal with it. And when teams don't do this, the founder might say one thing and then do something completely different, and it's there's no intention of it. I think the way that people can understand how they contribute that is through intentionality and being deliberate. So when you are, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, when you're thinking about the company you're going to join, but you're thinking about jumping out of where you are into a new company, it's about understanding who you are, what you hold to be your values, what is culturally important to you, and then asking those questions when you join. And actually asking, if you get the opportunity, people around in that organisation, why they value the culture, why they value the values. You get founders' worst habits amplified in small organisations just purely because of where you are. And you get people afraid to speak up. That's where the artificial harmony comes in. But I think from a founder's perspective, it is that intentionality is the watchword for everything you do, because that's the watchword for finances, that's the watchword for building teams, that's the watchword for your operations. And I think with culture, if you can nail it at the very beginning of it doesn't have to be overblown. You do not need a consultant to help you to do this, right? I sit with people all the time, sitting down and saying, I'm building this company as a founder for these reasons. Often it's a patient outcome. It's
Yeah.
often very personal. Most of my founders are curing cancer, curing diseases, finding remedies, finding outcomes because of an individual in their lives. That
Yes.
is just fundamental to what they're doing. But sitting down and going beyond that, who am I? What do I want to build? What would I like to see? That is the foundation. And then, but then allowing people to challenge you, allowing people to surface what that means for them, and allowing that culture to be built still with that essence of who you are and your values is really essential. So I think it's just about intentionally saying, I want us to be this company and I want us to have this understanding, is where it goes. If you're not prepared to live it, breathe it, understand it, don't do it, right? You can start a company and not talk about culture, right? It's not the be all
Yeah.
end all. The best companies have the best cultures and they think about it, but you can do it. So if you're not prepared to give it time, energy, and effort, don't do it. Genuinely, just start and figure it out if you want to. But if you want to build a great company that survives all of the ups and downs as an early stage company, then just sit down and think about it, and then get people to throw stones to talk to you about it, and get those early people in to make it a reality.
Yeah, it's so important because, of course, you want to also maintain high retention of the talent that you struggle so much, maybe at the beginning, to attract. And of course, you want them for as much as possible, to join you in this journey. And as the company will start to grow, of course, you will have a mix of people coming from maybe academia, but also from industry. And I think that sometimes there is a challenge in communication between academics and industrial professionals to understand each other' perspective. And of course, you as a founder, you like to prevent any culture clashes on that side of things and improve collaboration. What would you advise founders to do in these situations?
Really honestly, it comes down to being grown-ups and actually talking to each other, right? And we often don't. We've lost this ability to. We want everybody to be happy, and we don't want arguments. But arguments or discord, or just I don't mean arguments in stand-up fisticuffs. What I mean is having a good, conversation, um, and understanding each other. I'm being flippant, but it is a little bit harder than it sounds. You've got different backgrounds, you've got different ways of working. The friction usually comes from not establishing the relationship from the very beginning, and a shared understanding of the purpose from the start. Let's think about academics. You get academics that are used to rigorous peer review, clashing with industry people who need to move faster with incomplete data. And so they get that clash. You get different communication styles. If we think about academia, academics are trained to caveat everything versus industry folks who just go out there and give a clear recommendation, even if they're slightly wobbly on whether it can work. And there's often a fundamental misunderstanding of what good enough looks like in those different contexts. But
Yes.
I think, and it's the same for industry to industry, right? So it doesn't mean just an academic coming out. It can be industry to industry if you've been in big pharma versus small companies. I think the interesting dynamic that I find that we forget about in startups is lots of industry people are former academics anyway, and sometimes they can be the harshest critics. I'll say that word
Yes.
today. And they've made that transition, but they can be impatient with people who haven't yet made that mental shift. And then on the flip side, you get academics joining who are trying to figure out hierarchy and being overly deferential, and so they don't have the conversations they need to have. I have an example of somebody I work with, not in an early stage company, but within Start Codon, helping early stage companies, a young man called Sam. And part of what made him really successful, and he was very successful whilst doing his PhD, was that he built relationships really early. He didn't come in assuming he knew better than the industry people he was working with. He didn't dismiss either the academic rigor that came as irrelevant. He asked questions, he listened, and he was curious
Yeah.
about why people made the decisions they made. He found that balance between humility and speaking up, and he's a really great example of just sometimes walking into a room and just getting to know somebody. When I'm working with teams, I get them to often to surface these differences explicitly rather than letting them fester. So asking questions like, what does rigor mean to you in terms of the context of the project? What does
Yeah.
fast enough look like? What are we optimizing for here? Perfect data or moving forward? And what's the purpose we're serving? So we always go back to the purpose we're serving. Because if we can align on those things, the other stuff becomes the conversations of around how do we achieve this? And and rather than the my way is right and your way is wrong. So I think it's about creating space for people to understand each other's perspectives without assuming
Yeah.
bad intent. I have a philosophy that I have throughout my whole life. In everything I do is I always assume good intent, and I expect founders to. The conversations you have really early, if you have them early and you understand each other, the pressure cooker bit where there's an argument brewing or there's some discord, that's when you don't want to be having these conversations. You want to be able to have those intentional conversations. So for me, it's about, really making sure that you understand. And then on culture clashes, there are culture clashes that come from being from different parts of the world.
Mhm.
And you know what? The simple thing to say to people, and I keep having to say this recently, is why don't you ask people about what it means to be from wherever in the world they happen to be? Why don't you ask people about their journey to be in whatever country they've landed? Why don't you ask people about their journey with neurodiversity and what it means to them? There is nothing wrong with saying to somebody, tell me about what it means to be from a specific heritage or a
Yeah.
specific country. Tell me what it is like for your neurodiversity to show up and what that means for you. Tell me about those critical moments in your life that really framed you and formed you, so that you know somebody really well and that you can go, oh, I've had this experience, or I understand that. I think we've got to a point where we are so frightened to have these conversations. And with technology playing a major part, especially in our younger people coming into the world of work, that we've forgotten just to sit down with a coffee and a cake, or
Yeah.
over a pizza one afternoon in the office, and just say, tell me about yourself. Tell me what matters. Do you,
Absolutely.
are you conflict averse? And if you're conflict averse, how do I get the best out of you when I need to be, have a bit more conflict? And just establish a way of working that means you don't, when you are angry or you're under pressure or whatever it happens, that you don't have to then have that conversation. So I think for me, it's just about establishing your ways of working really early on, your boundaries really early on. And then, doesn't mean you won't disagree, and it doesn't mean you won't stomp out of the room. The best examples I've always had, and Arm is a great example of this for me in my career, is I could be in a room, have some major arguments about something with a bunch of engineers, and then walk out of that room and go for a beer.
Hmm.
It's not
Yeah.
personal. It was about how we were setting up teams. And that for me was a good sign for me about that professional integrity in the room, but also the fact that, you can be an individual as well and walk out the room and it doesn't become personal. And I've had some of the best arguments in my life in early stage companies, but then able to walk away and go, let's go grab coffee. Let's talk
Yeah.
about, the football, whatever it happens to be that day that you want to talk about.
Absolutely. Thinking about a professional that is joining a company as employee number 6, maybe,
Mhm.
versus an employee number 70. Of course, I think this will come with different expectations for this person, but also from his point of view, he will have different expectations for the company. Do you
Yeah.
think that the team dynamics and the individual contributions will change as the company grows?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're employee, number 6, number 8, you're doing way more than one job, right? You're the person who does X, but you're
Yeah.
also covering Y and Z because there's no
Yes.
one else to do it, right? So your role is fluid, you're figuring it out as you go. Your contribution is measured by your ability to get stuff done whenever it needs to get done. And honestly, for some people, that's the sweet spot. That's where they thrive. By employee number 70, roles are more fixed. There's process, there's structure. There are people who are actually doing the job that is the thing that they're used to doing. And if
Mhm.
you've stayed through that growth, and often people do, you have to get really good at giving away the things that you used to do, and that's hard. For a lot of people, they've built their identity around I'm the person who does X, and now they're the person who does X and Y and Z, and now they're the person who just does X, probably better than you know they've done before. And it can for people who are in that growth, it can feel like they're losing something, even when intellectually it's the right thing to do. I think the
Mhm.
mental shift that's needed in this is your value moves from how much you do to how much you own to the
Yeah.
quality and impact of your contribution. So at 8, you're valued for your breadth and your ability. Wear multiple hats. At 70, for example, you're valued for your depth, your judgment, your ability to make better decisions. Because you are, and if you've been around, you understand the context and the history.
Yeah.
Um, I think if you have been around longer and you are growing with an organization, you're early in, you've got a responsibility as the organization grows to be resilient and adaptable as the company changes. Also to be kind and honest with the newer people, share the stories of how you got there, because the institutional history is really important.
Yeah.
But not the "I was here at the beginning" attitude that doesn't help, and we do these things because of the way we've always done it. I think, for me, people have an issue with the transition because they can't let go. They're still trying to be involved in everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I work with quite a few actually, and one I think I might have mentioned to you that I'll introduce you because his story would be brilliant for your series. Is they get to 50 people and they go, "I'm done. I'm early stage. I'm number 4.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
always number 4. I'm always or number 3. I'm always early in." And they kind of grow a company. They get to 30, 40, 50 people. They too big for me. I'm going. And that is because they are breadth people. They're not depth necessarily, they're breadth people.
Yeah.
And they don't fit into the next stage of company. Those people are brilliant for founders. Go find yourself somebody like that. They're no threat to a founder in terms of the organization. But those people are rare. Most people want to join and stay. I think if you're thinking about which stage you need to be at, early stage is where the resilience is needed and where you get to play and have a lot of fun. But if you want to go into that later stage, so Series A, so bigger money, bigger organizations, I still think you get some of that early stage buzz, but you don't have to worry about being quite as resilient, quite as adaptable as you would have
Yes.
been. I think if somebody specific coming out of academia is thinking about going into early stage companies and are not sure that they have the ability to flex, I would go for the 30, 40, 50 people per kind of company first, and then go down to early stage.
Yeah.
Because you'll get some of that institutional knowledge, that capital that you don't have from being academia. Or if you're in early stage right now and you're thinking, this isn't quite for me, you don't have to jump from very early stage to big. You get that sweet spot of 50, 60, up to 100 people is really lovely.
Yeah.
So that's where, again, going right back to the beginning, experience, understanding and going and experiencing this is going to be really important if you're making that big decision.
And how do you think the founder could help those early employees that could struggle when the structure finally appears as the company grows? Can they do anything from the founder side?
I think founders have to have regular conversations as the company grows about the roles that people are doing. So reviewing what they're doing and why they're doing it, and actually talking to those early stage people about how they bring in new people.
Yeah.
But making sure they realise that they value that person for the contribution they continue to make. It's not about how much you do, the amount of tasks you do, it's the contribution they make. So I think founders, as they grow the company, don't have those really honest conversations very early on. The other thing is they don't have that career conversation with people to say, where do you think you want to get to? And then really develop people. So founders, again, it goes back to have good conversation and say, you're doing this currently. I think we need to bring a team in to do this. What does that look like for you? Do you want to sit here or do you want to sit there?
Yes, excellent. Talking about doing due diligence on companies before thinking about joining them as a candidate, what practical steps should a candidate take to assess whether an early stage startup is the right fit, beyond, of course, looking at the job description on paper?
It's a really good question. Firstly, do your homework on the basics. So what's the funding position? How long is the runway? You might not be able to find this out easily, but you can work out how much money somebody's got in a company really easily. You can work out runway based on the size of the team. If you don't want to be joining a company that's going to be running out of money in 3 months' time unless you're really You're kind of clear-eyed about that risk that they've got. Look at the hiring process itself. It tells you quite a lot. If there's no process at all, if the founder doesn't really know what they're looking for, if they're asking you to do work for free, happens a lot as part of the interview process. Those are really big red flags. So a good founder has done the thinking about what they need and why, and they've got some kind of structured approach to thinking, even if it's a bit scrappy. So as a candidate, you aren't in the weaker position. Actually, you're in a more positive position to ask all those questions. Talk to the founder and ask them really hard questions. Why this? Why now? Why you as the team to do this? What's your vision for culture? How do you handle disagreements? What happens when things go wrong? And pay attention to what they're saying. But also how they respond. Do they get defensive? Are they open to being challenged? Can they admit they don't know? Really important due diligence when you're thinking about the role. If there's already a team, take a look at them. LinkedIn's good for that. When you go in and talk to people, and I always think final stage interview should be in person if you can possibly help it. Do people on the call seem energized or burnt out? Are they staying, or is there high turnover? Again, you can have a look and see what that's going on. What's the vibe when you meet people? Does it feel psychologically safe? People can go and have a look at that term, in terms of, does everybody seem stressed or guarded? Go talk to other people, go and do digging on LinkedIn, Glassdoor, all those good things. And then be really honest with yourself about the alignment that you see.
Well, Emma, thank you so much for your contribution and your opinions on Voices of Innovation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No worries, anytime.